Welcome to the Women Money Business Podcast. I'm Dr. Basra, and today I've got with me Ruth Driscoll, the Life Liberator. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ruth. Would you mind telling us a little bit about who you are?
Okay, so yes, thank you for inviting me along, Pretty. I'm delighted to be here. So the work that I do is with those who are either in or they have been in a manipulative, controlling, abusive relationship. So it's dealing with somebody who's a very difficult person to deal with, somebody who triggers you, somebody who makes you feel bad about yourself. And although I mainly work with women, I have worked with men also, and I've also worked within the business world where you're dealing with difficult people.
Perfect. So I think that's what I was going to start off with, was saying that when you're sort of talking about dealing with difficult people, sometimes you automatically think it's like your partner. But sometimes you can have people in your life that are so close to you, but aren't your partner, that can make life really difficult for you. So it's good to know that you can also translate that into the working world, in terms of business as well.
Yes.
So in terms of your journey then, Ruth, why are you sort of so passionate about this work? I know in TEDx on a few things around this. Why is this such a passion for you?
Well, mainly because it happened to me. And at the time that it happened to me, I was the head teacher of a large and challenging inner city primary school. So, I was dealing with difficult situations every day, supporting people, to know how to handle that and make more effective decisions around that. That included parents as well as obviously children who were living in a challenging environment. But I had an abusive relationship at home. So that took obviously put a great deal of strain on me. And although I did manage to release myself from that situation, the result of that was that my health was badly affected, and because of that, I needed to make the decision to resign from my position as head teacher, because although it was a very rewarding job, it was also a job that kind of, if you like, drained your lifeblood. And I knew that the condition that I was now suffering from as a result of my health issues was a serious stress-related condition. So I had to make the decision to lead my life in a less stressful way. And I actually did have a qualification in life coaching at that time. So I thought, well, I can set up a business as a life coach. So after I had recovered from my health issue, I then was on the next quest, was, well, how do I set up a business as a life coach? And as part of that, I joined one of these mastermind groups. And I can remember the day when we're sitting around in a hotel. It was a beautiful hotel just outside Dorking in Surrey. And we were talking about the fact that if you wanted to set up a business as a life coach, you needed to niche. So I thought, well, okay, I could niche in leadership skills, in learning skills, in child development, in confidence building. But the group said, no. You've got to do, that thing, what happened to you, that personal experience. And my jaw fell. I thought, no way. Yeah. There's no way I'm doing that. I don't want to go back there. I want to forget that it happened to me. I'm ashamed that it happened to me. But when someone has sown that seed and it starts germinating, doesn't it? And it was because of that I kind of realized that because of my personal experience and my career experience, as well as the person that I am, it's almost like, okay, Ruth, this is why you're here. You're here because you've now got the unique skills to be able to help others in that position. So if you like, Pretty, I was kind of dragged kicking and screaming into into setting up a business in this field.
So that's really inspirational, Ruth, that you have managed to sort of change that trauma into something that is now sort of your income source. But can I take you back, if that's okay, in terms
Sure.
of the abusive relationship? And feel free to say you don't want to talk about it, it's fine. But just for my benefit, I suppose, and people listening, when did you realise that you were in an abusive relationship? Did you know from when you first entered that relationship, or was it later on?
I think a lot of it, the realization, the insights around it, happen when you're looking back. And this is the thing, that when you're in an abusive relationship, you're kind of in the worst possible place. To be able to recognize what's happening, to be able to make informed decisions around it. And it's because of the very nature of what's happening to you. It's an eroding process. You're gradually, because of what's happening to you, these sort of negative messages that you're being told about yourself, you're gradually being eroded. And when you kind of have that realization, you're almost at that lowest point that makes it extremely difficult to be able to do anything about it. So more of the insights have come looking back on it, although I can identify the exact day when there was a little bit of a red flag that goes up in your mind, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And it was because often what happens at the beginning of a relationship like this, the person comes across as almost ideal, and you feel like you've got a real connection with that person. And so it was a really strange thing that where we'd been together probably a couple of years by this time, when there was like a sudden flip one day, something completely irrational, where he started, getting into a rant about it, which was so puzzling because there was no rationale behind it. So looking back, and of course with the, the knowledge I've got now around it all, I can see that was the starting point of it. You see, the problem with a relationship like this is that once that that abusive aspect of it begins, if they feel you starting to slip away again, they turn it, and you're pulled back in again. They become the perfect person again. All the apologies and this will never happen again. All of that starts coming in, so you're drawn back in because when you start a relationship, you start wanting it to work. You put a lot of your hopes, your dreams. You're in a very vulnerable place, if you like. And so when you feel it sort of irrationally slipping away, and then it turns around and it feels like, that was just a blip. So that's when you start justifying it, making excuses. So you're doing all that stuff. And that can go on for some time before you start realizing, hang on a minute, things are, this is not right, and this is not going to change. But you're not in an informed place at that time. So you're going on your instincts.
And then you spoke about an abusive relationship, and as we know, abuse can come in all different shapes and forms. So in your situation, was it physical abuse, or was it more mental abuse, or was it coercive control, or was it a combination of those things?
It wasn't physical abuse. It was mental, controlling, emotional abuse. And the sort of physical side of it is almost like the very extreme of that happening. But it's an interesting question, Pretty, because I do sort of think about this, and I think, could it have been a physically abusive relationship? And the answer to that is, I think, yes.
Wow.
But I think that the reason that it wasn't, when I have to look back and see what was it I did there. You have to remember, I wasn't sort of, this was my second relationship. I'd been through a divorce. So it wasn't like my very first relationship. I had children from my previous relationship, so I didn't share children with him. So in a sense, I had that sort of slight degree of separation, although he did have children and I was like a mother to them, which I think was another reason why I probably stayed longer than my instincts told me I should. But I do feel, and this has helped me with the strategies that I support other women and indeed men, because I work with men also, to use when you are handling or dealing with this controlling, abusive person. I think it's because I'm a very honest person. I have a very strong integrity, and I'm also a calm person. So I'm not easily shaken into reacting.
Yes. I understand.
And I think that having that strength in terms of, I think that somehow stopped him from taking it to that next level. I think he was perfectly capable of doing that.
Right.
And I think that may have happened in previous relationships with him, that he had.
Yeah.
But, it's when I had to sort of almost reverse engineer, well, what did I do? And how could that be kind of improved upon, or what additional strategies could I use? That has all sort of formed the basis of the business that I now run. And the business that I now run, I have the underpinning value of everything that I do is respect. It doesn't matter what that person has done, you behave with respect. Because ultimately, that respect is what is for you, that you're not being drawn into being somebody you are not. Because that's what happens, you end up feeling, I don't even know who I am. I don't recognize myself. I can look in a mirror and think, I don't know who this person is. And when I look back again, I sort of see where I was almost instinctively doing that. Like, for example, when I chucked him out, and I'd arranged a time for him to come around and collect his belongings, and a very kind friend came over to help me. And I said, I want it all packed neatly and stacked neatly.
Yeah, not just everything in a bag.
Yeah, and he said, why? Just chuck it out on the pavement. And I said no, and I had to think, well, why did I do that? And when I look back, I realized the reason I was doing that was because that wasn't me. I was not somebody who treated anybody like that. I would never, behave in that way towards anybody. It didn't matter what they deserved. This was about me.
You.
This was about, me staying congruent with who I am, with the values that I hold dear. So but at the time you're just going on instinct.
Yeah, of course.
So it's when you're looking back. And here's another interesting thing. This is another thing that maybe your sort of listeners would like to have a little go at this, because this is an exercise that I do with clients, because you see, my belief is that it's not any weakness in you that means you're vulnerable to this person. It's actually the opposite. It's actually your very strengths, your very qualities. So I do this little exercise where I ask clients to write just very simple sentences about their qualities. So, for example, you might write, I am kind. I am supportive. I am loyal. I am generous. And you can make a list of those very short sentences. And when you look at that, you think, well, I'm a pretty darn nice person.
Yeah.
And the reality is, these are qualities for which you should be being valued and cherished. So why not? Why is this not happening with somebody who needs to behave like that? So what we do then is we add a word to those sentences. And the word that we add is to, T-O-O, and then read those sentences.
Yeah.
I am too kind. I am too generous. I am too loyal. I am too supportive. And you can see how the meaning of those sentences changes.
Yeah.
Because what's happening there is where you sabotage yourself.
Yeah. And I think
it's not because of your qualities. It's because you haven't got strong enough boundaries for yourself. You're not protecting yourself. Yeah. That's what we got to get back in place. You don't want to lose those qualities,
And I think it's when you can reflect and you have that exercise where you think, well, what am I? Because obviously if you've got a person saying to you, you're not this, you don't do this, you're like this, then you start to believe that. You start to think, well, maybe I am, maybe I am too, I talk a lot, or maybe I don't clean enough, or maybe, I'm always nagging, and you hear those kinds of terminologies all the time, but then having that time to yourself to sit down and think, well, do you know what? Who am I? And what are my beliefs and values? And am I being appreciated for them? Is pivotal, I assume, in a lot of people's lives. But then my question to you would be, if it's okay for me to ask, is obviously when there's abuse happening in terms of physical abuse, it's physical. It can be visible, and you want to try and hide it, but then you often can't, maybe because of, there's visible bruises and things. When there's mental and emotional abuse and coercive control, that's something that I feel is easier to hide because we can't see it. And we can only see it being the outsiders looking in if it's displayed in the relationship, that if there's a couple in front of us, and I know couples that have that kind of relationship, and it's very uncomfortable for me to watch this because I can see what's happening. But the person that's in that relationship, often the female, unfortunately, that I've noticed, justifies that behaviour. Say, no, he's stressed out. Asking him questions. He's had a bit of a drink, and validate and justifies that behaviour. So what would you suggest for people in that situation where everybody around you can see that car crash in slow motion, but obvious do it, or are you in a headspace where you're thinking, don't acknowledge it's happening?
Well, it is a very difficult situation because it's almost like one of those situations of, until they accept that themselves, they're not likely to sort of take those moves to seek help. But by mentioning it, at least it's sowing that seed, isn't it? You're sort of recognizing that things are not right. And this is what can be so distressing, because when you as a friend, you see that happening. But often if your friend is not accepting it, they move away from you. You can lose a friendship as a result of this. And I think in a case like that, because when somebody's inside this kind of a relationship, they're not themselves. They're not being themselves. They're acting in a way that that you can see. You can look and say, that's not you. Why are you accepting this? But until they're ready to to accept that for themselves, then you are limited in what you can do. I mean, you can just keep in touch by sending a text or something like that, so that when they do eventually make a move that can release them from that, at least they know that you're still there. But it is a situation where, although it's not their fault that that's happened, they do carry a lot of shame around it. Shame that it happened. Shame that you you let that happen.
Often, like I've seen that they're made to feel like this is the best they're ever going to get in the relationship. Like, no one will put up with this. You're lucky that I'm with you. And then that erosion, like you spoke about, is happening.
Yes.
And then I think often I've seen that those people will start to believe that is actually the best that I can have, and I can't leave because no one else will want me. And sometimes I've also noticed that there's a pattern of behaviour that certain individuals are attracted to certain individuals, and they just repeat that cycle of abuse.
That can happen. Yes. That's why it's so important, even if you've left, that you know what has happened, that you're recognizing your patterns as well as that other person's patterns. So, then it becomes easy to spot those red flags from a very early stage. Then you're able to sort of move away. But it is, as you mentioned earlier, it's getting back in touch with your values, recognizing who you are, what you stand for. But it's also recognizing how you played a part in this. Although you didn't realize it, you didn't do anything deliberately. It was interesting because when I got out of my relationship, and I was very fortunate that I had a wall of warmth from friends who I hadn't even been that much in touch with, because isolating you is another part of it. And a friend said to me, she said to me, "Ruth, how could you let this happen to you? How could you let this happen to you?" And I thought about the way that was worded, because it wasn't, how could this happen to you? How could you let this happen to you? And that's the fundamental first step. You've got to take responsibility, not blame, but responsibility. Why is that important? Because when you take responsibility, you are now putting yourself in the power place. When you take responsibility, you can, as Stephen Covey says, become response-able. If you think it happened to you, you're a victim. And that's the helpless place. So you have to step into that place of power and take responsibility, because once you've taken responsibility, then you can put in place the changes that need to happen to ensure that it never happens again. When I got out of my relationship, I had 3 questions I needed the answer to. The first one was, why was I vulnerable to these negative messages about myself? What was it about him that made him so pointlessly and randomly cruel? Because there was no sense to it whatsoever. And how could I be certain it could never happen again? So that was my quest. And
they're very important questions, aren't they? Because when you've been explaining what's happened, immediately my thought went to, was there something going on with him that we weren't aware of, and sort of we as listeners weren't aware of that was happening? That's led to that sort of switch in, especially when you're saying that it's very out of character. So it has something happened that did that, or is that person just very good at being almost like a chameleon in certain situations? And it's almost sort of looking at what's happened in the past, what's happening now, how to prevent it in the future is what it sounds like. The questions that you asked go to answer, because you don't want to repeat that pattern. you want to learn from it, grow from it.
Yeah.
And we're not perfect, unfortunately, as much as we might think we are. We're not perfect. We have our imperfections. There might be things that we're doing that we naively or ignorantly don't realise that we're doing. But the only way we know that is by asking those questions to ourselves. And I think often we're so busy in life that we don't have a chance to ask ourselves that question, any question really. We just carry on. If it's not broke, let's not fix it. But then the hole just gets bigger, and then it can translate into something that's so much bigger than what initially you had. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, well, but it's interesting what you're saying there is, why do why does that abusive person behave that way? And it can be that there is something that has happened or something that has triggered them, or it can be that they have a personality disorder. And with the work that I do with clients, this is where you start to recognize what's going on. And the thing is, because now you are changing, you're not now that person accepting what's going on. You're not that person who's reacting, which is where obviously that's where that abusive person's power is achieved, because they can press the button, you react, and that's the predictable scenario, and that's how they feel powerful. But when you are changing, then you are also becoming extremely observant over what's happening with them, and you will know that if they now you're not accepting the bullying behavior, they change and start to, if you like, behave themselves, be more like a human being than a bully. It's something that they haven't resolved with inside themselves. But if there is no change, there's a personality disorder here. There's nothing you can do, and that's where you absolutely have to step away.
Have you found with the work that you've done, so in terms of when you're saying that you work on yourself and you had to change yourself and see whether they then change almost fall in line with what you're trying to put out there, have you found that by sometimes doing that, the person can actually be threatened by that and think, what do you think you're doing? And then ramp it up a level?
What tends to happen immediately, and I didn't realize this at the time, although obviously I experienced it at the time. But yes, they ramp it up. They definitely ramp it up, and the reason they ramp it up is because that's all they've got.
Yeah.
They haven't got any other strategies in place. So all they can do, and so this is why we have a laugh about this. I put them in that place of observation where they're predicting, what's going to happen, and almost like being curious about it, and I didn't know. Yeah, I thought he would take 30 seconds longer before he reached that. So you're not in that place of reacting to it. You're actually being actively curious, observing, and of course the problem that happens there is that once they realize it's not working, then the bubble of supposed power they have over you is burst. And once that has happened, it cannot go back again. Because your perspective has changed. It's not that you have changed, but your perspective has changed. Now you're looking from a completely different perspective. And once you've started doing that, the lens can't go back again.
No.
Now it's different. And I have an 8-point strategy for what you do if someone's coming at you with anger.
Right.
It's called the cupcake code. and interestingly, there was quite a young girl, teenage girl, whose mother was the bully.
Oh wow.
And so the younger, with just using just one step from the cupcake code, while her mother was raging at her, and she was managing to stay calm and not react. And then eventually her mother yelled at her, "What's going on? Why aren't you crying? You're usually crying by now."
Yeah.
Well, talk about revealing yourself.
I know, yeah. And that's someone's mum. That's a mother.
I've worked with people where it's a parent that is the domineering, abusive character,
And that,
the emotional manipulation, the emotional blackmail that goes on.
I think that's when at the beginning, when I was saying, like, you know about the couples, but then there's so many, I think, for personally I've experienced, family members, friends, and make you feel so bad, and you just think, why are you doing that to me? And then you have those discussions with people that's nearest and dearest, and they might not see what you see. And then it gets even worse because you think, is it just me? Am I imagining this? And you go in your own head, but then you've got sort of the toolkit, even those questions like you mentioned, who am I? What am I? And it just brings everything back to almost like a focus, like a reference point to say, well, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not that kind of person. And it's maybe it's a them problem rather than a me problem. And I think, I don't know whether it's society or just the change of time. I think there is like the blame culture, and it's almost like people find it easier to say, oh, it's them. And which it might be them, like we've discussed, but then sometimes they might think that we're doing unknowingly, or that we're not quite realising, that we're allowing the acceptance of that behaviour towards us.
It's what you're doing or not doing.
Yeah.
But you've got to know what what change you can make.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you can say, oh, it's that other person, but that doesn't stop you from being affected by it.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop, them living inside your head and destroying your sleep and sending your blood pressure sky high, or affecting your appetite, or all of those other things that happen. Because of the effect that toxic, because it's a toxic situation.
Absolutely.
So you have to know how to remove the toxicity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in terms of working with you then, Ruth, so if people wanted to sort of learn more about working with you, can they find that on your website?
Yes, my website is thelifeLiberator.org.
Okay.
Or I'd be very happy if anyone wanted to send me an email, which is ruth@thelifeLiberator.org. And I will always do a complimentary consultation call, so that somebody can explain to me exactly what is going on, where they need that support and help. But the the good news is we can turn it around quite quickly.
That's good. That's
put that person back in the power place over their own life.
Absolutely. And I'll include all of the links that you've just said in the show notes. I think the main thing for me is that, like, you've lived through it, you've lived it, breathed it, come out the other end. I think there's no better person position to sort of navigate that journey than you, really, because like you want to be able to relate to how you're feeling. So I think anybody that wants to go through that journey, I think you're just the perfect person to do it, Ruth.
Thank you, Pretty. And yes, it's sadly such a common problem. And so, if it is something that's happening to you, the first thing is, do not feel ashamed about it. Like, I was a head teacher. I was in a top leadership position. And so, remember, it's not because of any weakness that you have. It's actually your very strengths, your very qualities that have meant that this has happened to you. And we've got to know how to change that perspective.
I think sometimes it can be like the person can become intimidated, like, especially if you started your journey.
Yeah.
and there's alignment. Obviously, as you go through life and things change, you can be less aligned to each other, and the person might actually be threatened by your success or your position,
Yeah.
and rather than looking at themselves and think, what can I do better? It's easy to say, why is she like that, or why is he like that? And try and pull
Yes.
you down.
Yes.
And like you said,
These are the skills of what I call elegant assertiveness.
I like that. I like that. I like
It's
that.
a life skill.
Yeah.
It can support you in any situation.
Yeah. You don't have
So
to
it
be
is assertiveness, but it's graceful, it's elegant, and it puts you in that place of calm and dignity.
Amazing. So thank you so much for today, Ruth. I really enjoyed speaking with you. And I'll see you guys on the next one. And I will include all the links for Ruth's contact details on the show notes. See you later.
Thank you.